Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so today we are really getting into something complex, probably one of the most challenging deep dives we've tackled. We're trying to understand the consciousness, maybe even the metaphysical side of the entire animal kingdom. And our sources are, well, they're unusual. We've got a transcript from a hypnotherapy investigation looking into animal life, their soul structure, reincarnation, or maybe the lack of it. But, and this is crucial, we also have this methodological disclosure that basically says, hold on, single session data isn't straightforward. It's like a big warning sign.
Exactly. And that tension, that's really what we're exploring today. We need to look at what this deep hypnotic work suggests, about animal consciousness, their evolution, these big metaphysical ideas. But we absolutely have to keep checking back with that methodological filter. It's kind of a balancing act. Really fascinating ideas, but yeah, taken with a significant grain of salt.
Right. Okay, let's dive in then. The foundational piece, animal consciousness. The source seems clear they are conscious, but it's complicated, like a spectrum.
That's it, precisely. The main finding is that it's not just one thing. For a large part of the animal kingdom, think insects, bees, spiders, that sort of thing, the default seems to be collective consciousness.
Like a hive mind.
Sort of, yeah. Or maybe think of it as an ecosystem all running on the same shared information.
So not really individuals in the way we think of it, more like parts of a bigger whole. But then there are exceptions. Individual consciousness.
Yes, definitely. That kind of unique individual awareness, the kind that maybe feels closer to our own self-awareness, that was seen but only in specific situations, mostly with really complex mammals.
Okay.
Dolphins, whales, elephants. Those are the main ones mentioned. But even then, the source was careful to say it wasn't necessarily every single dolphin or elephant. It suggests there might be some variation, maybe it develops, or it's a choice.
Interesting. And I remember reading something about the big predators, like lions. They weren't quite in that individual category either.
Correct. Animals like lions, they were described as having a subliminal part. It's more than just the collective mind, definitely more advanced, but it's apparently distinct from that fully individualized consciousness you might see in a whale. It suggests, highly developed instincts, super fast adaptive processing, but maybe not that inner voice, that self-reflective narrative we associate with individuality.
And crocodiles. They were just pure ancient hardware, basically.
According to this session, yes. They were specifically mentioned as having only an animalistic part, so collective consciousness again. No individual awareness detected there, kind of like the evolutionary baseline.
Okay, so if many are connected collectively or subliminally, how does that work? How does this huge collective mind talk to itself?
Well, the sources describe a common language for all terrestrial animals, but it's not language like words. It's based on sound and frequency.
Frequency. Like high-pitched?
Exactly. The subject perceived it as very sharp and thin. Think high frequency, almost vibrational communication. And it's structured. This communication, this data, it's stored and connected through some kind of shared network within that collective consciousness. The source used the word thread.
A thread. Wow. Like a giant silent internet connecting all animal senses across the planet.
Yeah.
Allowing them to perceive things together.
That's a good way to picture it, yeah. A vast network for mutual perception.
Okay, that's a mind-boggling amount of information flowing around.
Yeah.
Which leads to the processing differences. We humans use our big brains, our cerebral hemispheres. How do animals handle that data stream?
Their whole system is built differently. For animals, their highly developed senses, smell, hearing, sight, they seem to have the same capacity to get information to consciousness as our brain does. Their senses are their main processors.
Which explains that weird visual comparison in the source. Human consciousness as a smooth sphere, but animal consciousness having angles. What does that mean?
Right. The sphere represents our kind of holistic, self-contained awareness, often dominated by internal thought, mental chatter. The angles, though, they seem to relate directly to those high-definition sensory inputs, those frequencies. It suggests specialization. An animal's consciousness is perhaps less about deep internal reflection and way more about immediate adaptive processing of what's happening outside. They're built for constant engagement with their environment. Their senses are so powerful, they act almost like secondary brains.
Okay, so if their hardware is different, how does that affect their spiritual journey, for lack of a better term? The source was very clear about something they don't carry.
Yes, absolutely clear on this. Animals do not carry karmic baggage, not in the way humans apparently do. They aren't part of that whole moral cause and effect accounting system.
So no karma.
Right, though.
But they learn, right? What are they carrying forward?
They carry experiential memory. But it's purely informational. It's brought into their awareness just to help them adapt, to understand their world better. They store sensory data, experiences, but not like moral debts or historical grudges. They learn, adapt, but they don't seem to carry regret in the same way.
Wait, the source mentioned karmic bridges between humans and animals. How can karma be involved if they don't generate it?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, metaphysically speaking. Connections can apparently be karmic, but the flow is only one way, from the human to the animal. The animal seems to act like a pure receiver of that energy.
Why can they do that? Receive our energy, our karma.
It seems to be down to their fundamental nature. They can apparently read our energy fields instantly. That ability, combined with what the source called their purity, simplicity, and capacity for giving, allows them to take it in. They can absorb human energy, maybe even reflect or neutralize it, but they don't create their own karmic burden from it. They're like clean conduits.
That simplicity. It lets them navigate life without all the baggage we seem to accumulate.
And it impacts their evolution too, right? They're not on the human reincarnation cycle.
That's right. The source describes their path as a cycle of choice and experimentation, more like an evolutionary flux. It's about moving between forms based on accumulated experience, pure data, rather than paying off moral debts. So, maybe the experiences of a small fish inform the next life as a bigger fish, and then perhaps that leads towards a land animal. It's about informational continuity.
But here's the bit that really jumped out at me. Jumping stages. The idea that animals can actually skip steps in that flow and choose to incarnate as humans.
Yeah, that was a surprising finding, and it seems directly linked to us. It happens when animals live really closely with humans for a long time.
Like pets or livestock.
Exactly. They essentially absorb human ways of communicating, our behaviors, our emotional complexity, just by being around us. The source mentioned cows, cats, dogs, specifically animals in close contact, learning enough about the human experience to potentially make that huge metaphysical leap. Wow. And among all animals, is there one considered the most evolved, metaphysically speaking?
The source points to the whale. The main reason given was its incredibly developed emotional body. That level of emotional sophistication apparently gives the whale the potential capacity to don the human costume, as the source put it, to transition directly to a human life, if it chose to.
Which loops back to their incredible adaptability. The source suggests it's because they lack that dominant mental body we have. We carry so much mental ballast, as you called it earlier. They don't.
Right. Mental ballast, that constant worry, the rumination, the anxiety we generate ourselves. Animals seem so adaptive precisely because they don't get stuck in that mental loop.
And this is where it gets really practical for us, I think. They treat tough stuff, emotion, danger, trauma, as just information, pure data. They don't seem to analyze it endlessly or build stories around it or let it become chronic stress.
They react, they respond, and then they discharge it. This is that concept of the shake-off, like when a dog gets wet and just shakes it all off. It's apparently a similar principle, a powerful, immediate physical movement to just release that negative information, that heavy emotional load. It seems like a built-in release mechanism.
The power in that is just immense. To experience something intense, react appropriately, but then not hold on to it as ongoing suffering. To feel it, act, and then physically shed the residue. Imagine if we could do that easily.
It suggests their whole response cycle is incredibly fast. For us, trauma often becomes this stored story, this narrative. For them, it seems to be immediate information, immediate response, immediate energetic clearing. They're just built for moment-to-moment adaptation.
Okay, before we get to the big methodology warning, one more thing. Interference. Given that simplicity, that lack of mental clutter, are they vulnerable to, external entities?
Yes, they seem to be. The sources confirmed animals can be interfered with by other consciousnesses, whether ETs or other non-physical beings. Their vulnerability isn't weakness exactly, but rooted in their simplicity or maybe their lack of a developed concept of good versus evil, the way humans frame it.
So it's like they don't recognize the malicious intent, a conceptual blind spot. What does that interference look like?
It often manifests as a brief but intense possession. The external entity basically hijacks the animal's body, causing radical behavior changes. But animal bodies aren't really designed for that kind of hosting. So afterwards, the animal suffers a huge energy drain, a total slump or collapse. They're just physically depleted by having that parasitic consciousness attached, even temporarily.
Right. So if we want to interact better, move beyond just dominance or control, if we want genuine communication or collaboration with animals, what's the key? What frequency do we need to be on?
We need to consciously shift into their frequency. Simplicity, purity, kindness. It means deliberately setting aside our usual human mental baggage, our judgments, our complex intentions, any aggressive energy. Because they read us instantly. The sources emphasize they pick up on human dominance or aggression through everything, not just body language, but our hormones, our scent, our whole energy field. They know our intent.
There was an example in the transcripts contrasting the standard view of, say, slaughter, where the human tries to be emotionless to prevent suffering, with a different model. A pig farmer.
Yeah, the pig farmer who raised animals in true collaboration, where the relationship was built on respect and kindness throughout the animal's life. In that context, the final separation, the transformation into food, was described as assumed and somehow harmonious. It suggests that a non-dominant relationship can create a kind of shared understanding even around difficult transitions. It connects to those other visions mentioned, seeing Earth in a different time, maybe past or future, with big cats that were radiant, non-ferocious, living in symbiosis, a completely different way of being.
Okay. We've covered some truly profound, almost mind-blowing ideas here about the animal soul, evolution, how they process reality. But now we absolutely have to hit the brakes and talk about that methodological caveat. Because all of this fantastic detail comes from just one deep hypnotic session.
And that's the critical point. Information from a single session is, almost by definition, highly contaminated, distorted. The source used the analogy of speaking underwater. The signal gets massively obscured by noise.
Where does all that noise come from?
Oh, multiple layers. Distortion can happen just crossing dimensions, you know. Interference from other consciousnesses is possible. But crucially, it comes through the subject themselves. Their own beliefs, culture, religion, even subconscious traces from their own past lives. All of it acts like a filter, twisting the raw information into something their conscious mind can make sense of. That initial data from one session, it's often not useful for objective research. Its main value is usually diagnostic, helping that specific client.
So if one session is basically useless for facts, how do researchers in this field confirm anything? Like the details on animal evolution or possession, what's the reliable method?
The only way to establish reliable information, like the details often cited about, say, greys or reptilians or complex metaphysical rules, is by finding the same data points repeatedly across thousands of sessions done by different people with different operators in different places over long periods. That's the only way they can start to filter out the individual noise or contamination from each subject.
And here's the statistic that really makes you pause.
Yeah.
The percentage of information that actually survived that rigorous filtering process that becomes verified common data is tiny. The source estimated maybe only 2% to 3%.
2 to 3%. Yeah.
So the other 97% or more is what they call junk information.
Exactly, which forces us to look at everything we just discussed, the whale being the most evolved, animals jumping to human form, the collective mind's structure, and realize it's currently sitting in that potential 97% pile. They're fascinating possibilities, powerful ideas from that one session, but they haven't passed the verification test. They aren't established facts within that specific methodology. That's why serious investigations have to focus on really narrow topics, restricted spaces, to even attempt to manage the filtering process.
So where does that leave us? We've glimpsed this incredible picture of the animal soul, its purity, its unique evolutionary path, but we have to hold it very lightly, acknowledging how difficult this kind of data collection really is.
Pretty much. It means that while this particular source paints a picture of animal consciousness as incredibly flexible, pure, and adaptive, the methodology itself screams for intellectual humility, for critical thinking and the need for verification, especially when we're talking about metaphysical realities.
Which brings us back, I think, to the most immediate takeaway. The one thing that feels potentially solid and useful right now. If there's one big lesson from the animal kingdom presented here, it's that ability to see stressful things as just pure information, and then to shake off the emotional weight, that immediate discharge. So the question for us, stuck with our complex minds and all that mental ballast, is what's our equivalent? How do we practice our own shake-off to stop dwelling and just move forward? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of animal consciousness. We'll see you next time.